Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor, and today's vlog I am going to be reading 3 dark academia / campus novel books. I know that dark academia is it's kind of debated, right? Like, is it a subgenre? Is it a genre? Is it just kind of an emotive descriptor of books that take place on a campus? So I don't know exactly what I'm going to call this vlog yet, but I do have 3 books that I want to read that all heavily feature a campus setting, feature a school setting, and either feature students or teachers as main protagonists navigating their way through schools, both magical and mundane. So I have 2 brand new releases. 2 of these books came out this year, and then I do also have 1 backlist. I tried to kind of vary the picks so we wouldn't have 3 magical schools or 3 dark academia thrillers. So I do have a little bit of an assortment. So let's introduce the books really quickly before getting into the vlog. And the first book that I'm going to talk about is the one that definitely inspired this vlog concept, and that would be Katabasis by R.F Kuang. This is one of my most anticipated reads of the year. I haven't read it yet. I've been nervous to read this one, not for any reason other than the fact that I get weird sometimes about my most anticipated releases, and I put them off because I'm so scared the expectations won't meet the reality. So this one is my magical pick. We are following 2 grad students who accidentally kill their professor, or they accidentally, they cause somehow the death of their professor, who is also their academic advisor. And these 2 grad students have to travel through the 9 levels of hell to bring him back so he can write them letters of recommendation. I love R.F Kuang. I'm really excited to really delve into this one and see. I know there's a lot of literary references like Alice in Wonderland, Dante's Inferno that have inspired this one, and I'm so excited to dive into it. Very excited. I love like a magical school setting, and I think the fact that this doesn't exactly take place inside of the school, it takes place inside of hell, but the themes about academia and hell and all of that I think are going to be really interestingly explored in this one. Another book that I'm going to be reading for this vlog is Girl Dinner by Olivie Blake, and this one is, I think, more of a campus satire, and it has to deal with a sorority of some sort, as the cheeky title suggests. Maybe some sort of cannibalism, whether that be on page or more of a literary metaphor remains to be seen, but I am really intrigued. Just like R.F Kuang, Olivie Blake really does incorporate a lot of academic themes in her works, like critiques of academia and the school system, the higher education system. So I am really intrigued to read this satire, see how it works for me. And then last but not least, we have the book I'm actually going to be starting this vlog out with, which is the backlist. It came out in 2019, and that is The Swallows by Lutz. And this one is about a teacher who teaches creative writing at a school, I believe, and when the responses from her students show some very troubling trends, a la Boys Will Be Boys, portraying a deeper issue not only within her classroom, but the administration and the school culture at large, the teacher leads the girls on a crusade of their own. The back of this book compares it to Wes Anderson, and it says it's a delicious and vicious battle of the sexes set within a private school, wickedly fun and wildly subversive, but packing an emotional punch. So I am going to start with this one, and I'm very intrigued. I actually haven't heard a lot about this one. I actually have an ARC copy of this one. I got it as, I think, a summer reading prize, something like that, from my local library. So this has been on my shelves for a while. Can't wait to finally dive into this backlist, check it out, read more about it. I'm gonna go get to reading. I will check back in later with a reading update. So I am now 40% of the way through The Swallows, and I'm really not enjoying it at all, which is pretty disappointing just because this has been on my shelves for a while. I got the ARC a while ago, just from my library. It wasn't like one that the publisher sent to me or anything, but I've had this sitting on my shelves for a while, and I think the cover is quite striking, and the basic synopsis on the back sounded like something I would be interested in, and I'm really not getting along with it too well so far. So we have 4 main points of views in this book. We're following 2 teachers at this school, Stonebridge Academy, and we're following 2 students as well, 1 male, 1 female from both of those, the students and also the teachers. So primarily we kick off our story following Miss Witt, who is a brand new teacher at this academy, and it's a very like private and like liberal, I'm gonna use liberal in quotes because it's not that liberal of a place, but it seems like the rules are very loosey-goosey and very unconventional for a school. But this is a boarding school for high school students, and Miss Witt moves in. She has had some problems with the past school she was at. We don't know what those are so far, but she has just a little bit of an unconventional past and things she's running away from, including her famous author father. She has a very strained relationship with him. She is now the creative writing teacher at this academy, and as she's giving assignments to her mostly senior students for the creative writing class, she gives them a prompt, and the answers that she gets back from the students indicate that there is some sort of problem going on, and it seems to really heavily involve sexual coercion. So she's trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. There seems to be a mysterious, she doesn't know what's going on, if it's a society, a website, a slang word, like something is going on involving all of that, and she's trying to get to the bottom of that. We're also following the male teacher, who I really don't like. He's a bit of a perv, like he's a lot of perv. I'm not sure what exactly he's bringing to the table other than highlighting maybe why something like this could be going on at the school, because all of his POV chapters, all he talks about is how great he is, which of his female coworkers he slept with, which ones he'd want to and which ones he would never want to, and then also talks about his students in quite a disturbing manner as well. So we get him, and we also get him trying to become closer to Miss Witt, and then we have the 2 students, the male student and the female student as well, and the female student is trying to get to the bottom of this scenario that is happening, which turns out to be a website that the male students have put together to rate girls, and I'm trying to figure out how to speak about this without this video getting flagged, but the boys give ratings to these girls based on their performance with oral sex. So that still sounds pretty terrible, but it is the premise of this book, is that there is like a website dedicated to ranking these girls, and the girls are obviously very upset by this. So that is an intriguing premise. I'm a little uncomfortable with how explicit this book gets, because it does take place at a high school. So I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of language we get to hear and see and get a lot of description about a lot of that and things surrounding that, which I don't love reading about. This is not YA, but I still, as an adult, am uncomfortable just reading the amount that we get about it. And I know this book is not condoning those things, but I think maybe for some sections it could have been easier to write this and not go into describing pictures that are sent around to the school of an underage girl, or describing what exactly these kids are talking about. So it is very uncomfortable, and what is really uncomfortable is that this book is, I feel like, trying to really play into a satire or just like an absurdist sort of angle. It's trying to be very, very funny, and it's just not. It's not a funny situation, but also just the humor is not landing for me at all, which is making this really, really hard for me me to get through. This came out in 2019. It takes place in 2009, and I will say it does feel like a book that came out in 2009. Like, it feels very period accurate, but in a weird tropey way where all of the girl characters, especially all of the female characters, are either very much very quirky and very not like other girls, put in quotes there. Everyone is just trying to be so quirky, and it almost like lends a little bit of fantastical to this story that doesn't make sense. And I understand on the back why this was compared to Wes Anderson, because it takes place in our reality, but just there's something very absurdist about the way people act, the way people talk, the way that institutions are run and everyone is interacting with each other. It's very bizarre, and it doesn't feel like true to life. So it feels like very caricature-y and cartoony, and the tone is not working for me. So I don't know, I may DNF, I may persevere. I'm 40% of the way in, which is already a significant time commitment to have spent on this book, but this book is over 400 pages. So if I'm already not getting along with it, I don't know like if I want to keep going through hundreds of pages more. So I'm unsure. I'm really unsure about where this book is going, because I get the sense of where this book wants to go, but just it feels like it's moving at a very glacial pace, and I'm really not loving the tone nor the characters. So we'll have to see about this one. I did end up finishing The Swallows, and I didn't enjoy this one. I appreciated the conversations that this book was trying to have, but the execution just didn't work for me. I didn't like the tone. I didn't like how it was trying to be so very funny, and especially towards the end, I felt like it just kept turning more and more cartoonish and not very realistic. I do feel a little hypocritical saying that I have read books that feature a school setting and even feature similar dynamics or conversations that tackle these conversations a whole lot better, because this book came out before those ones. So, you know, it doesn't seem right to say that this isn't anything I haven't read before, because this does predate some of the books that I think handle these difficult conversations about sexual violence and boys will be boys culture and rape culture and all of that in schools. So I do appreciate, you know, this one came out in 2019. Those are difficult and important conversations to have. I just didn't like the tone of this one, and the way in which I would describe the very surreal aspects of this one is like, think about a sitcom. I'll use New Girl as an example because that is a sitcom that I do like, and it is kind of dated, at least the first couple of seasons, around the same time in which this book is supposed to be taking place. So in a sitcom, you will have a little problem that the characters have, and the way they decide to problem solve is not what people would do in real life, because that would not make for entertaining TV. They have to come up with heists and plans, and it's very over the top and silly, and that's what makes a show like New Girl work. But New Girl never delves into serious conversations like this book does, and I think that's where I didn't like the tone, because when New Girl touches on important topics, more serious topics, the show turns a little more serious. It doesn't continue hijinks with the characters, and this book kept trying to problem solve things in a very unrealistic way. So it definitely had like that sort of sitcom problem solving. The adults annoyed me in particular with this, because there were just so many adults just sitting back and watching things happen, not reporting them. Like, there are protocols to report this kind of behavior when a student comes, because I have a lot of teachers in my family, I have a lot of teachers and mandated reporters that are friends of mine. Like, there are protocols that teachers have to do. And it's frustrating reading a book where it's like played off as quirky and silly and fun, that the teachers either don't do anything about it, or the teachers encourage the girls to set upon these pranks and vigilante justice sort of ways instead of just getting the police involved. And I understand that doesn't make for a good book, but I didn't love that sort of problem solving and just weird, surreal sitcom style of logic that pervaded throughout this one. So I am glad, however, to take it off of my physical TBR. I will be throwing this in a little free library or just donating it back to my library. They have like a little stand right outside where they have a little free library of their own. And I am glad to have read it, just because it's now no longer sitting on a shelf taking up space, making me constantly be like, ooh, maybe I should pick that book up. So first book of the vlog done. Unfortunately, not a success. So to try and pick up some reading momentum and get myself a little bit more excited for the next book I'm going to pick up, because that's the kind of low-rated book that doesn't put me in a reading slump, but makes me really excited to pick up another book that I feel like I will like more. So I'm excited to dive into a story that I hopefully resonates with me a little bit more, and I'm going with Katabasis by R.F Kuang. So this one, we're moving away. This is the magical sort of fantastical story following the two grad students as they go through circles of hell. So I'm gonna get to reading this one. I'll check back in later with a reading update. I am now 30% of the way through Katabasis, and I'm really loving it. I love R.F Kuang. She's one of my favorite authors, and enjoying another story of hers. I love diving into a new Kuang book. Just her prose really speaks to me. The writing style, I love the way that she's building up this story, and it really does feel like a story that only she could pull off in some ways. So I am really enjoying it. I will say, like, a couple of random comps that I have for this book is it's really reminding me a little bit of some very specific scenes in The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman, the third book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. Obviously not getting into spoilers with that one, but some of the themes and scenarios, and not even scenarios, but just like set dressing and overall aesthetic of the books, they feel very similar in an interesting way. So I thought I would mention that. And then as well, the world building in this one, and not even necessarily world building, but maybe just like the conversations of academics and different philosophies, and then the magic that our main characters are using feels a little bit Tolkien-esque in a way that I'm not comparing it to The Lord of the Rings or anything like that, but just in terms of writing style, where both Tolkien and then Kuang in this book, they take their time. It's clear that they're both playing in a sandbox that is very interesting to them, and we have some asides. So this is being narrated by Alice, but we will have asides between every couple of chapters or so where we'll get on chalk, on magic, on like it'll just really do a quick little deep dive into a specific element of the magic and world building system. And you don't necessarily need those in the story, but they're very fascinating. So I just think that in the way in which the story's sandbox is being played with, and just really experimenting and explaining a lot of these concepts so that the reader fully feels immersed, those feel very similar to each other. I know it's kind of a common complaint of Tolkien's, so I do think that that could be an apt comparison for this one. In this book, we are following Alice, and she is studying analytic magic at Cambridge, and at the beginning of the book, her professor, her graduate advisor, has died, and this is a really big deal for her because he is her academic advisor. She needs his letter of recommendation to continue on with her career. Her field is very limited. There are only a certain number of spots available, and she wants to be a full-time academic, and she needs this letter of rec. He has died, and he can't give her this letter of rec, but instead of accepting that and kind of pivoting her career goals, she decides to attempt the impossible and travel to the courts of hell to grab his soul, bring him back, revitalize him so that he can write her this letter of rec. Chapter 1, she's drawing these circles. She's preparing to dive into hell. We don't spend a lot of time setting up like the story of her schooling or anything else. Like, we just see this woman on a mission. She's prepared to dive into hell. She gets interrupted by Peter, who is another graduate student who they have a very fraught relationship with each other. They're very much like academic rivals, even though they have different concentrations. And to her surprise, he's like, this is actually a great idea. Let's go to hell. I'll help you, because he also has reasons of his own for bringing the professor back. So they both agree to do this. They dive into hell, and this book is an exploration of them going through the 9 circles of hell and experiencing that, looking for their professor so they can find his soul, save it, and bring it back for them to get those letters of recommendation. This book feels very, very character driven, and Alice and Peter are very flawed characters. Alice is a little bit neurotic. I mean, you can tell that kind of from chapter 1 that she has a very unhealthy relationship with grades and academic achievement and progress, because the cost of getting into hell is very steep, and she's willing to pay that all for getting this letter of recommendation. She has her eyes set on this goal, on a tenure track, and nothing else is acceptable for her. So she is a little bit unlikable, but I really like that exploration of her character. And these two characters, you're just watching them traverse through hell together. What I find very interesting is that we do get flashbacks and are experiencing what Alice, like the very complex relationship that she has with her professor. Because you might assume if you are traveling to hell for someone to rescue them that you would have a good relationship with them, but the relationship that she has with him is very, very complex. Her and Professor Grimes didn't really see eye to eye. He is a very demanding and withholding and it seems like a very hard advisor to have, and they didn't always get along. It's also clear that her and Peter had a better relationship with each other before this novel took place, maybe as like very close friends or something like that, but because of the rigorous structure of the school and the very cutthroat nature of the program, they've really been pushed apart, and they are like academic rivals. Now, it's very clear that these are academic rivals in a very rooted in reality sense and not a romantasy sense. They don't hate each other, and they both really respect the other's intellect and mind. They have very different concentrations, Alice in linguistics and Peter has one in mathematics. So they respect each other's intellect, but they just get on each other's nerves a lot, and I find that very interesting, them trying to navigate this very harsh landscape going through the 7 courts of hell, and kind of talking about how the different philosophers of the day, people like Dante, who have actually been to hell in this book, and they were recounting their experiences, and they're trying to figure out how much they can use as a roadmap through hell and how much was like academic or even just novelistic embellishments. So I am really enjoying that. I'm really enjoying this book overall. It definitely feels like a book where this couldn't have been a debut. This feels like a book that Kuang is writing for the love of the game, with all of the different sort of academic side tangents and just really like thoughts on different philosophies. I think is so fascinating, and I definitely think had this been a debut, I think maybe publishers or editors would have pushed it to be a little more action forward and plot forward, but because Kuang has that track record of success, she was able to publish this book that is very character driven, very philosophy driven, and I'm really, really loving it. So I'm gonna keep reading this one, and I will check back in later with another reading update. I am now 60% of the way through Katabasis, and I am really loving it. I'm enjoying my time with the story and just having a great reading experience overall. I will say this is absolutely one that feels very character forward. It can get a little meandering at times because the road through hell is meandering. So Peter and Alice going through all of these different courts and these theoretical studies of magic to try and figure out how to navigate their way through the courts. It's very convoluted at times, intentionally so, reflecting the situation and the landscape that they're in. I saw on the dust jacket that this one is comped to Piranesi, and I think that sense of just being so unfamiliar with the terrain and having everything just be a little bit like shifting under your feet all the time. As a reader, I think that's super effective. I love really getting to parse the different layers of Alice and Peter and their relationship with each other and the trajectory of that relationship, and also both of their complex relationships with Professor Grimes, because he is the reason why they are both now journeying through hell. So I am really enjoying this one. This does take place in the 1980s, and at the beginning I was a little like not confused because I knew that Kuang would probably have a reason for this to be the case, but I was wondering, other than aesthetically, why this would take place in the 1980s, especially because we do get flashbacks and see Alice especially at Cambridge, but for the most part we are in hell, so I didn't think necessarily there was going to be a big explanation for that setting of this taking place in the 1980s, but I think it's really clear as this book goes along that a lot of Alice's psyche and worldview and the way she views academics, the way she views academic achievement, and the way she views herself and her place in the world are very dependent on the time period. Decided to put my book down for the rest of this update. It is deceptively heavy. It is not quite, I think with the author's note acknowledgements and all of that, I think it just hits about 500 pages, so it's not the largest book that I have in my collection, but the hardcover is very, very dense. It's a heavy book, so it's up there now, but I think Alice, a lot of things that make her such a flawed and interesting character to read from, I think it makes total sense that she is a graduate student in the 1980s, and I'm really loving that exploration of her character. She does not have the best opinions, obviously. I think her worldview is a lot different than people in 2025 would think, especially for a woman. You want more from her. Especially at the beginning of this book, she makes a lot of comments here and there where you're just frustrated for her because you can see these injustices before she does, it seems like, as the main character, as the reader reading about this main character, right? But then as we go through this novel, we see how the backdrop of the 1980s has really influenced her opinion on herself and her desperate self-flagellation to try and get ahead. And I think that's so intentional because we are seeing in later generations a little bit, we always see, I feel like in history, whenever there's a progressive swing, the pendulum always comes the other way back around. And I think it's important to discuss like big social media trends like tradwives and seeing, unfortunately, young women saying things like feminism doesn't really matter anymore, feminism doesn't make sense, unfortunately. Even people like going so far as to say that like women were happier and life was better when women didn't have jobs, didn't need to have jobs, and just stayed at home and didn't do anything other than that. So I think that kind of regression without realizing all of the strides that make even tradwives possible, right? Because you can't have tradwife content on TikTok without feminism making that possible, making these young women have the choice and the agency to be able to choose that for themselves. And of course, being a tradwife influencer is a job still, and it's really selling an idealized version of the standard stay-at-home life that is unobtainable for so many people. But just getting into that, I think it's really clever what Kuang is kind of addressing in here, because I think where we are now politically feels very similar to the 1980s. And so when we see Alice pit herself against these older women, the bra-burning feminists that she has so much disdain for, you see that she thinks that she is more evolved and that they don't really need feminism anymore because she's got a spot at Cambridge. She's a learned woman. But as you go through her story, you see, and she starts to see as well, that just because women have made some strides does not mean that there isn't more to do, right? In terms of women's liberation and the way that she is treated as an Asian woman in a very white all-boys club of Cambridge in the 1980s. Like, there's still a need for that, and just because she thinks that things have progressed doesn't mean that there aren't still problems in the system. And I think that exploration of her self-hatred and her internalized misogyny, I think that's really fascinating to read. So I really do appreciate that conversation, and it's blended really seamlessly in there, because at the very beginning, chapter 1, you have like no idea, at least I would feel like for most people, you don't really understand why this young woman would go to literal hell just to get a letter of recommendation from her advisor. And then you start peeling back all of these layers of the things that she's gone through to get where she is, and just all of the different experiences that have shaped her and her opinions and viewpoints on the world. I think it's really very fascinating. R.F Kuang does an excellent job of writing these very unlikable at times but very complex main characters. So definitely I'm really loving the ride of this one. It's a fantastic character-driven story, and I can't wait to finish it. I finished Katabasis and I really loved this one. I think it was just such a perfect blend of a lot of things that I just generally really love in a story, and just once again, R.F Kuang knocks it out of the park for me. So definitely enjoyed reading this one. I have such a hard time of putting off anticipated releases. I hold off on them. I want to savor them. I don't want to even start them sometimes because I know I'll never get the experience of reading them for the first time again. Let me know if anyone else can relate to that at all. It's why I'm so horrible at finishing series, whether that be TV shows or book series. I never want it to end. And I bring that up because this book does feature life and death so heavily. It's a trek through the underworld, and I think it brings up a lot of really great points about living your life to the fullest every day. And that doesn't necessarily mean trying to bring the most out of life every single day, but just appreciate even the small things like the taste of butter or the sunlight, how the air smells, little things like that every single day. Just appreciating that, appreciating being alive. I really appreciated that, and I definitely am one where I need the reminder to use the fine china, as it were, to use up things, to not hold off and just wait and wait for the perfect circumstances and the perfect day, because that may never come around. I can't remember exactly where I read it, but the phrase "use the fine china" comes from this think piece or essay that I read that was talking about a family when their grandmother had died and they were going through her belongings and her estate, sorting through all of that, and there was a bunch of fine china that had just never been used because the plates were too nice to eat upon, and how the author and her family all decided to take some pieces of that absolutely gorgeous set and just use them for every day, because things like that, if you just save them and save them, it could be, you know, the fine china, it could be a candle, it could be, I have like a couple of retired scents and fragrances of things like lotions or stuff that I've just been saving and saving and saving, and they're gonna go bad. Like, things are gonna go bad. If they don't, then, you know, I will. Like, I'm going to pass away. Everyone on earth will. So just using up those things, not waiting for the perfect set of circumstances. And I also loved that this was just such a perfect blend of both a love letter to intellectual thought and academia, but also a critique of academia and higher education and the grind horse type of pace that the expectations are set upon graduate students and the ways in which they are exploited. So I really loved and appreciated this book. It's definitely going to make its way onto my favorite books of this entire year. So second book down for this vlog. It was absolutely a success. I loved reading R.F Kuang's latest, and now we are moving on to the third and final book, which is going to be Girl Dinner by Olivie Blake. Olivie Blake is another author that I tend to really enjoy her work. The Atlas 6 was what drew me to start reading more works from her, so I'm excited to see her dive back into the kind of dark academia sort of sphere with this satire. So let's dig into Girl Dinner. Currently 30% of the way through Girl Dinner, and I just feel like this one is a little bit hard to pin down at this point in time. It is genre tagged as horror on Storygraph, and this also was marketed as dark academia, so I am expecting some horror elements, but at 30% of the way in, this does just feel more like contemporary fiction satire of the university experience, and more specifically a sorority experience. We are going back and forth between two main characters, Sloane and Nina. Sloane is a professor at this university that we're following, and then Nina is a sophomore at this university. What's interesting, I want to make this point up front because otherwise my review might sound a little bit vague, but the university is not mentioned at all in this book. It's just called the university with a capital U in university, and likewise the sorority and everything surrounding that is very vague as well. It'll be described as the house being capitalized and all of that. So we get just like a very general sense for these things intentionally because it's really like a satire commentary on the university system, not one specific university as a whole. So I do think that's interesting. Universities never mentioned, and I haven't really gotten a sense for where in the United States this is supposed to take place as well either. So we're at a university. We follow Sloane, who is just getting back into teaching. She has a very young daughter, and she's taken about 2 years off of her career to raise her daughter, and now she's ready to get back into the career field and is just having such a hard time balancing everything. Her husband is great. He is a supportive partner, but she is struggling with the different expectations that society puts on mothers versus fathers, and just really struggling with a work-life balance of being a working mother and also caring for her daughter. She just feels like it's increasingly impossible to have it all, even though everyone says that it is doable in this day and age. She's just feeling a little bit worn thin. We're also following Nina, who is a sophomore at this university. Her first year, she had some struggles. She had some issues. We haven't really gotten to the extent of that, but it seems like freshman year was really hard for her, and her sophomore year she decides to rush a sorority, and more specifically the house. Nina sees this as an opportunity for networking and to get farther in the world. She wants to rub shoulders with all of her former coworkers and colleagues. She wants to be a lawyer someday, and she knows that entering the Pan-Hellenic community will really get her a lot of of great connections get her a leg up, and it just so happens that these characters are both going to be entangled within this house, because that ends up being the sorority that Nina rushes and becomes a pledge to, and then Sloane becomes the academic faculty advisor for the house as well. So they're both kind of orbiting this very mysterious sorority. The house in question, the sorority in question, seems to be very, very desirable, cream of the crop. It does not take as many pledges as any of the other sororities on campus. They just seem like they are the most accomplished and go on to have really incredible careers, which is really what draws Nina into them, as well as just this dazzling allure of everyone seeming like they have their shit together. And then Sloane, who is a little bit lukewarm on the whole sorority culture, decides that this is a good fit to be an academic advisor just because she's met some of the alumni who are also involved with the school, involved with the sorority, and thinks that this is a good thing to do to not only get some friends and kind of build upon her mother-life balance, but also help this sorority that does seem very, very academically minded and high achieving. This is also one that, because it is like a satire, a campus novel, it is supposed to be funny, unlike The Swallows, and I do feel bad. It's just a different sense of humor. I think the people that will find The Swallows' sense of humor funny will not find this funny, and vice versa. The type of humor is just really working for me. Olivie Blake has had a sense of humor in all of her books that I've read, and this one is no different. I like the little commentaries in both characters' monologues about things that they desire, things that they want, and just the complex relationship of being a woman in today's society, especially in these very interesting dynamics like a sorority. And on the back of this book, Delilah S. Dawson actually blurbs that it's an exploration of the many hungers of the female heart and the pain behind the drive to be everything to everyone. As a woman, as a mother, as a wife, and as an artist, I felt this story in my bones. So we're really experiencing, maybe you can tell by the title of this one, hunger and desire, and how that manifests in a woman's life in two very different stages of life. Sloane as a professional who is getting back into the workforce, and then Nina, who has just started to begin her journey. So far this has definitely been a lot of setup, and even though I feel like that's all the plot I can give you at the moment, is that they're both navigating this mysterious house that might have some secrets up its sleeve. Not too much has happened other than that. It feels very tonally like Bunny, but without the magical elements at this point in time. So I am intrigued to see how much horror this is going to get into, because it is marketed as horror, but I am really enjoying the ride so far, and I'll check back in later with an update. Okay, 60% of the way into Girl Dinner, and I'm absolutely getting the horror now. It was a slow build, but not a slow paced story, but now that we've gotten to the horror, I think it's gonna get a lot more horrific from here. So I did finish Girl Dinner by Olivie Blake, and I had a fun time with this one. This one was it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the pacing of this one, how it started out a little bit slow, but this doesn't read like a slow book. But then once it gets to that horror, things do get very, very interesting and a little bit bizarre. I think in terms of the tone and the type of horror that this is, I do think that Bunny by Mona Awad is a really good comp title. Just they both take place on college campuses, but they both capture this sort of bubblegummy horror, sort of satire and commentary on college life, very different aspects of college life. But I do think that if you like one, you'd like the other, and I think it's also a very good example of what kind of like tonal horror this is, because it does start off, it doesn't start off like overtly horror. I had mentioned I didn't know if this was going to be more just general fiction or horror, and then once it gets to horror, it really does go there. So I had a lot of fun with this one. I did like the acknowledgements, and one of the things about the acknowledgements is that Olivie Blake does talk about the origins of the name. I think the name is I think it's a really good fit for this book, and it did start out as an internet meme, and she does credit that meme the creator Olivia Marr on TikTok. So this book was not inspired by that TikTok, but the name certainly was, and it definitely fits, again, that very bubblegummy pink sort of narrative that this has. Also, something that I was kind of thinking and maybe considering as a comp title, I was going to say, bizarrely, the movie Barbie. Just the tone felt very much in line with that, and in the acknowledgements, the author actually does reference that Barbie, the movie, was an inspiration for some of the tone. So if you are looking for horror with that kind of tone and you don't mind that it takes a while to get there, I do think that you would like this one. It was enjoyable. I liked what it had to say, and just like the author mentions, alongside with that comparison to Barbie, this is not an end-all be-all book. It's a satire commenting on some of the expectations of hunger and the desire to want to have it all, where we have Sloane, who is desperately trying to have everything, to have the perfect career, the perfect marriage, the perfect motherhood raising style for her child. She wants to have it all amidst a world that makes that really impossible to do so. And then we also have Nina, who is a woman of color who is rushing a sorority, which is predominantly very, very white. So we have a little bit of commentary on that and kind of the explorations of the different waves of feminism going against each other. I thought this did a really good job of just focusing and touching upon some of those topics, and Olivie Blake does mention in the acknowledgements that a lot of these things are simplified. A lot of the characters are like blown up to be caricatures a little bit, just to really drive home that satire, that social commentary. So I had a fun time with this one. I wouldn't necessarily call it dark academia, but it's definitely a campus novel with a lot of fun satire and some very interesting horror moments. And there you have it. That brings us to the end of this reading vlog. I had a good time, had some successes, found one of my favorite books of the year and another really solid read as well. So while I definitely don't know if all of these books would necessarily be considered dark academia, they definitely all had a lot to say about different aspects of college life, collegiate life, academia in general. So I did really appreciate that, and I had a fun time overall. So thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my content. Stay safe, stay spooky, happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate in the US, and have a good one. Bye!